after war, back in the mountains of Utah. It just, all the worry and concern was just obliterated. And we disbanded our military. We just disbanded very rapidly. Now's the time for peace.
Civilian goods are already trickling from factories, and shortly washing machines and other luxuries we've missed will be pouring from the factories at 1942 prices. And with new cars and new tires on the way, America will be rolling with a pre-war flourish. Yes, cars, radios, vacuum cleaners, nylons, juicy steaks. It sounds almost like a dream.
In the spring of 1946, Winston Churchill came to the United States and tried to shock Americans out of their complacency. In a speech at Fulton, Missouri, carried live on radio, Churchill issued a stern warning about Soviet actions in Europe.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Budapest, all these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere.
Churchill's vivid picture of a continent divided by an iron curtain helped change the public mood. Once, the press had portrayed an alliance of three equals. Now, Uncle Joe was turned into a scheming despot, forcing whole countries into submission. From the East, Soviet cartoonists responded in kind. These crude caricatures were part of a new type of war, in which governments taught whole populations to demonize the other.
In the background was the growing struggle between two great powers to shape the post-war world. Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war. On orders from the Kremlin, Russia had launched one of history's most drastic political, moral, and economic wars, a Cold War. The United States was obliged to help Europe safeguard its traditional freedoms and the independence of its nations. Gone was the spirit of wartime unity that reached its peak on that historic afternoon in April 45 at the Elbe River in Germany. Here, two worlds actually met, but this coalition was to be torn asunder.
The Soviets dramatized the meeting on the Elbe in a feature film. Their version of events showed a bloodthirsty American general bent on the domination of Europe.
Старая война окончилась. Началась новая. Война с коммунизмом.
Я вижу другие сны, господин генерал. Мне снится мир.
Пожалуйста. У нас свобода сновидений.
Я прекрасно помню фильм «Встреча на Эльбе».
I remember seeing the film, Meeting on the Elbe.
Что где-то я там буду. Мне, конечно, было...
I thought I'd find my character played somewhere in it.
Где-то никто...
I was terribly upset when I realized that it was completely untruthful.
Жестокая неправда.
After leaving the army, Lieutenant Silvashko had become a school teacher and soon realized that his moment of fame was best kept to himself.
Атмосфера была страха. Дети любили
Everyone lived in fear.
рассказ о войне. Но
The children liked my tales of the war, but I never told them about the meeting on the Elbe.
Не было. Если бы я действительно, собственно,
If I discussed what had happened openly, I would have been in trouble.
То меня ж бы спросили, зачем Я бы нес бы,
I would have been pulled in and questioned by the secret police.
Перед органами госбезопасности.
Ich hab so Heimweh nach dem Kurfürstendamm. Hab so ne Sehnsucht nach meinem Berlin.
Berlin remained under the joint control of the wartime Allies. Its western sector was an outpost of capitalism, deep inside the communist world. Moscow decided to put a stop to it.
Switches are pulled on generators, and the fuel famine forces drastic power cuts. Berlin becomes a city of darkness as all ground communication is severed and industry comes to a standstill.
All access to Berlin was controlled by the Soviets. In June 1948, with no warning, they shut off the city.
The blockade was prepared weeks in advance. We'd done everything we could to make the Allies leave West Berlin voluntarily, because it was like a cinder in our eye. So, in the end, we decided to force them to leave by making life intolerable for West Berlin.
Western leaders had watched passively as Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control. This time, they decided to act. Regardless of cost, they began to supply Berlin from the air. Experienced pilots were called back.
Telex came in and says, we want 4 of your airplanes to leave Mobile, Alabama, go to Frankfurt within 4 hours. And we want crews for that. And so I volunteered. We knew the dire straits that the people in Berlin were under. I was excited to join the airlift and brought along my 8mm camera. We're just coming out of the shower again, Pickering, my co-pilot. We'd fly all night and come back in the middle of the day and sleep in the middle of the day 6 hours and take off again, round the clock.
Month after month, the planes kept flying. To people in the West, the blockade confirmed all they'd been told about the Russians.
It seemed to me as we flew the airlift, it came right down to the basic level of comparison between good and evil.
Mit 250.000 Nettotonnen Gebrauchsgütern für die Berliner Bevölkerung. Diese kostbaren Ladungen nach Berlin zu bringen, mussten die Flugzeuge eine Strecke zurücklegen, die 1000 Mal die Erde reicht.
One landed every 10 minutes. You can imagine how we felt. The planes flew low over our rooms in the officers' quarters in Karlshorst. Those enormous planes, 100 meters above us.
On some flights, Captain Halverson added a personal touch, parachuting chocolate bars to the children of Berlin.
Was ich jetzt persönlich erlebt habe, war, dass etwas herunterschwebte.
Something was floating down, and many of the children knew what it was.
Die rannten. Und ich dachte, naja, gut.
Everyone was running, and I was thinking, what is it? What's going on? And I started running, but there were only a few parachutes, so I didn't get one. So then I wrote to the chocolate uncle at Tempelhof Airport.
A little girl wrote me. Her name is Mercedes. She says, when you see the white chickens, drop it there. I don't care if it scares them. Well, I looked for them, and I couldn't find them. I dropped all over the approach. I had my buddies in the squadron drop another letter. Look, you guys are missing this all the time. So finally I gave up on her. I took a big package of gum and candy to Berlin and mailed it to Mercedes.
Als ich dann so das erste Stückchen Schokolade von der Tafel.
This was the first piece of chocolate I'd had.
Schokoladenonkel.
From the chocolate uncle. And when I bit into it, it was heaven on earth.
Himmel auf Erden, ne?
Midnight of Wednesday, the 11th of May, 1949. The blockade of Berlin is due to end as crowds gather at the Russian-British frontier.
After nearly a year, the Soviets backed down, turning a major crisis for the West into a triumph. But in the East, people knew little of such political setbacks. The citizens of the Soviet bloc never heard the bad news. They were constantly fed messages filled with admiration and love for the leader of the communist world.